Maybe there is no such thing as rain. There are only raindrops, each with its own story. Robin Walkhammer, Braiding Sweetgrass. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. Themes in fiction are crucial in making a story feel like it was worth taking the time to read. This might be debatable, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. But to me, a book's theme is basically its thesis. Nonfiction usually has a point for its readers, right? Like, what's the point of reading X or Y nonfiction? On Writing by Stephen King is to learn about writing from one of the best who's ever done it. How to Read a Book by Mortimer J. Adler is to teach you how to be a better reader. History books are pretty straightforward. They just teach you about a specific place in a specific time period. Memoirs are to gather the accumulated wisdom of a person that they've gathered over a lifetime. For fiction, though, it's a little bit more complicated, but I think most people would say that, well, the point is just for simple entertainment, right? And yes, fiction is obviously entertainment, but a book would not be entertaining if it wasn't engaging. And it's themes that makes books engaging. Themes are what make us care about fake people and fake places. And we're entertained because we've bought into the stories that we love. Authors know this too. If you go out looking for fiction writing advice, I guarantee you that you'll see something along the lines of, write for your themes. Wherever an author wants to take its story, it should always stay tied, anchored to the themes that you're trying to say. Because the themes are all at the same time the message, the thesis, the heart, and the reason we read in the first place. Entertainment is only a byproduct of those things. I want to bring Red Széll back onto the show. He's the host of My Life in Books and my guest today. He comes on every 2 weeks to join me for this show. And I want to hear from the listeners about their takes on whether they think themes are as important as I think they are. But I want to hear your thoughts, Red. Well, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think definitely as in genre fiction, we have come to expect that there is going to be a theme driving the narrative. Possibly not quite so much in literary fiction, where the theme can sometimes just be that this is a literary exploration of an author's point of view, but definitely in genre fiction, I think there is a focus on theme, and certainly you see themes ebbing and flowing across the decades, usually sort of 2 or 3 years behind the news, what's affecting us. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of books with dictator themes coming up in the not too distant future. Sure, people are scribbling away. I did find incarceration themes kind of flared up in the sort of 2021-22 publishing lists. There are a lot of books written by people who had clearly spent too much time at their own desk and unable to get outside and exercise their legs.
The last time that there was a boom in themes having to do with tyranny and dictatorship, it was in the mid 20th century, right? 30s, 40s, 50s. I wonder why, Red. I wonder why. Like, that's around the time that 1984 came out, when Animal Farm came out, Elvis Huxley with Brave New World. Themes are often tied to what's in the news, what's affecting us, the political situation. And, something else that we're seeing a lot is exploring mental health. Anxiety and depression has become a much more common theme since the 2010s.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, that has been a major theme of the last decade. Partly, I think that's driven by the mental health crisis that has been caused by us just not being able to switch off. We have these little devices in our pockets all the time that keep us connected with a world that maybe we shouldn't allow to intrude 24/7 into our lives. But also, I think I mean, the flip side of that is that people are far happier to talk about their mental health. And there has been a recognition that mental health has been treated as mental illness by the medical profession. And as soon as you get the medical profession involved, they want to give cures. They are there to try and make things better. And I think perhaps there's a temptation to assume that the medical professional is always the expert, whereas even back in Roman times there was the physician heal thyself. Look, listen, and learn from your patient, because they actually are going to be telling you what their symptoms are, and that might help in the diagnosis. And certainly that's something I've come across in literature of the last decade and a half.
Because people who have mental illnesses, issues with their mental health, they can tell it themselves. And when you take the time to sit down and write a book, your words are measured. And so you can explain it. You can lay it out in a way that's much more concise and accurate to what you're trying to say than if you were just, in a doctor's room rushing to get it all out in 5 minutes, right? Like you see the value in exploring themes of mental health to get people to really understand what it's like. And it's the same thing with any kind of theme, because that's the beauty of books. The wording that an author uses are so precise, and you can get a message across, I'd argue, much more closely to what you're trying to say than if you were to just stammer it out. If you were just in front of somebody trying to explain it off the top of your head.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, very much so. And I think, that there is always there always seems to be a time limit when you go and see the doctor, and you always want to say more than you end up saying. And you always wonder if, am I, how am I appearing?
And oversharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we have to remember is that, this is the patient narrative. And if I'm sitting in the doctor's chair, it is my patient narrative. And if you take control of your own narrative and deliver that to the medical professional who's seeing you, and it's something I've found over the years with my sight. I remember being told, well, you should be able to see still, because not all of your retina has been pigmentated. It's pigmentated, that's a terrible word, and not all of it is covered in black pigmentation. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, put yourself in my eyes and you might actually be able to see that I can't see a thing. And
wait. Let me get this right. Wait. So the doctors were saying, well, Red, you should be able to see. I'm looking at your eye and I don't see what the problem is. Like, what? Yeah. You should be able to see. Meanwhile, you're like, no, dude, no, I cannot see.
Exactly. It's like, why couldn't you read anything on the eye chart? And this is at Moorfields Eye Hospital, one of the world-leading eye hospitals. I'm seeing the expert in retinitis pigmentosa, and he's telling me that I should be able to see because not all of my retina has changed from red to black. Well, I'm sorry. At that point, he is no longer the expert. It's me who's the expert, because I'm not making it up. But yes, no, and it's something that has really chimed in books that I've been reading over the last 15 years. An embarrassment in the medical profession when they cannot give you a solution. And because, doctors want to help. Doctors are human. At the end of the day, they want to be able to help. But if they can't help, then I think quite a few of them, especially of the older generation, feel an embarrassment. And that embarrassment they can't cope with. So they end up transferring it to you. And you end up feeling embarrassed. So yeah, now I have taken to writing things down when I go to see the consultants about my eyes and going, right, this is my narrative. You can work with that.
Do you
Absolutely.
just give
So,
them a copy of your book?
well, yeah, there is. Haven't quite done that. Anyway, I'm trying to sell these books, not just give them away. But no, I mean, I think it's good to see the genre of people writing their own medical narratives, of questioning whether a mental illness is treatment resistant or whether maybe they're being given the wrong treatment. And again, we're talking loaded language here. When you have a medical record that says the patient is treatment resistant, that actually argues that the patient has stuck their heels in and doesn't
The
want to be treated.
problematic, right?
Exactly.
Mm.
Actually, maybe the doctor is using the wrong treatment.
And I know that on your show, coming up today, actually,
Mm.
um, you read a book about exactly this, and this is what sparked this conversation initially. Do you want to talk about this specific book you were highlighting?
Yeah. KJILO is a Toronto based award winning columnist. They describe themselves as mentally ill. And certainly, once I had read their memoir, The Monster and the Mirror, which examines how mental illness has been portrayed through the years, I came to understand that there is a dislocation between what they have experienced in the 40 odd years of their life and the perception that other people have of their mental illness. This is a person who, as a little girl, aged 5 or 6, I think, was being bullied in the playground, and lashed out and was labeled as a monster. So she came to believe that she was sheltering a gremlin who at times would just bubble up inside her and go out and cause untold damage to her surroundings and to her reputation. She describes it as if the gremlin would go out, smash things up, and always take another part of her away.
Like
And
like a gremlin that she couldn't control, like it took her over, like it possessed her. Like,
the o-
is she being figurative?
well, the only way she could control it was through selective mutism, and she did her best to
Whoa.
control it. And she found sanctuary in the fantasy genre. Her fondest memories were of her mother reading her The Lord of the Rings when she was a little girl, and I think most of
Hmm.
us can relate to the safe, warm feeling of being tucked up with a parent reading us a story, especially maybe a fantasy story where you can
It's a
imagine
long
yourself.
bedtime story.
Well, I think clearly, and yeah, clearly many happy memories, I suppose. And KJ later found sanctuary and an alternative to their chaotic world in the Dragonland books, where they could project themselves as a character and believe that there was magic and dragons out there who could come to their aid, and that they could be a strong young woman and have a voice. And I think this is what a lot of genre fiction authors seek to do. It might not be creating your own patient narrative, but it's creating a different narrative for yourself in what you are writing. It's turning your wishes, your hopes for the what if into a form of reality, an alternative reality. And I think, that sense of the other in fiction, where there is a perfection and an imperfection, and the perfection can be the hero, and the villain can be seen as the imperfection, is is core to an awful lot of fiction, whether it's fantasy or detective fiction.
I mean, the other is an interesting theme because, in a way,
Mm.
it's kind of a meta theme. It's so common in books that it almost goes without saying. If you ask
Yeah.
somebody, "Oh, what were the themes present in your book?" you almost never hear the other because it goes without saying. I interpreted it a little bit as the community and those outside the community. And this does kind of
Mm.
work still in this narrative of perfection versus imperfection. People who are in the community are aligned with the values and therefore are, at least regarding the values, perfect. And those who are outside it are rejected because they're imperfect. And there's this duality, this relationship
Mm.
between community and those outside of it. And so much conflict, you know, revenge,
Mm,
hate
mm.
comes from the relationship between those who are outsiders and those who are insiders. Outside the community rejected and those inside accepted by the community. And it's such a common theme.
Oh, absolutely, and it's right at the core of all that 5th century BC Greek writing that we have. It's oikos and polis. Polis, where we get the word metropolitan from, is the city.
Really? Huh.
Oikos, and oikos, where we get the word oik, which means a ruffian or somebody you don't really want, are those who live outside the city, who the Greeks also refer to as the barbarians, because they believed that everybody who lived outside the city went bar, 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 and you couldn't understand what they said. And it's a very dismissive way of referring to them. So, yeah, you've got the insiders and the outsiders. And as you say, that stretches throughout literature, throughout history. And clearly, we've superimposed ideas of religion over that in the Western world with our sort of view of Christianity, of good and evil. You know, think about how many works of fiction have Lucifer or Satan or Mephistopheles, that tempting us to the dark side, and then and look at who we see as our heroes. They tend to be sanctified.
Yeah, you look at Lord of the Rings, it's very clear who the villain is. It's like these disgusting beast like orcs that are ruled by this weird creepy guy in shiny black armor, like just dripping with malice, whereas the
Mm.
heroes are this like this white wizard on a super shiny white horse, and they have magic and eagles on their side. Like the symbolism is quite uncomfortable and
I
basic, right?
absolutely. I mean, it's usually the white guy who's the hero, isn't it? And I mean, this raises all sorts of questions about the portrayal of villainy and disability, which unfortunately we still have in the whole the Batman comics, and the James Bond villains always seem to have a disability. And I mean, do we create villains? Frankenstein's monster only wants to be loved. He wants to be educated. He wants to be part of a family. And as he says to Frankenstein, "You created me, but by treating him as a monster, by labeling him as a monster, all the way through Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein refers to his monster as monster, creature, it." Yeah, very dismissively. He created him. Just because he's ugly doesn't necessarily mean that he's a monster. And interestingly, when the monster, I'm using the word myself, when the creature uh, escapes, runs away from Frankenstein, he is living in a hovel where he can observe a family, and he learns how to speak and he learns how to read because they're teaching him. They're teaching a foreigner how to read and speak their language. And when he
Mm.
appears to them, they chase him away because they're scared of what the creature looks like. Only the blind father recognizes the humanity in Frankenstein's monster because he is not misled by his eyes. And I think that says an awful lot for, the way our visual world sees disability and sees the other.
It reminds me of The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka.
Mm.
Have you ever read this one? This is
Oh, yeah.
a novella by Franz Kafka with an absurd premise where a young man wakes up one morning and he's a gigantic insect. And that enough is to completely ostracize him from his family. They treat him like an animal. And at the end, he just dies of starvation, and his family is happy to see him go. And they're just happy to see the entire ordeal be done with. And the point is that it doesn't take much to be ostracized like that. To no longer understand something is to turn it into a villain. It's the same thing. To not understand something kind of vilifies it naturally, especially when there's a person behind it.
Absolutely. And and I think it does exactly the same kind of job as Frankenstein's monster, just to say, be careful what you create. A novella just to set the balance right, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading and has stuck with me all the way through my adult life, is The Secret Sharer by Joseph Conrad, in which a sea captain who finds himself quite isolated and at sea and mistrusted by the new crew he's given recognizes the humanity in a man who swims to his ship, escaping from a murder charge on another ship, where he has, as we find out, acted in self-defense. And the sea captain shelters him and feels an empathy with him, realizing that actually, in the wrong circumstances, all of us can turn into a monster.
It's easy to have people misunderstand you. And I remember reading this book, was it Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell? That book has a misleading title because what it's really about, at least my interpretation, was that most conflict starts through misunderstanding, miscommunication. And that's what causes separation of the imperfect and the perfect, the community and the outsider. There's a miscommunication between those two groups, something not aligning that's causing this vilifying effect. I want to shout out one more good example of the other, and a bit of a controversial book. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Holden Caulfield, the main character in that book, is ostracized by society, but he kind of does it himself because he doesn't understand the rest of the world, which is kind of an interesting take. And so there's lots of different things that can push us apart, but ultimately it's communication, understanding that it does two things. It brings us together. It narrows the gap between the other and the community. But it also makes it that we understand each other better. We become more empathetic, and it solves problems because it's that divide that causes conflict.
I agree, and it carries the important message that if you turn your back on empathy, if you turn your back on the rest of society, then you are responsible for your own downfall.
I just made a realization in the Game of Thrones series. The ice monsters, they're called the White Walkers. In the books, they're literally called the Others, which is pretty on the nose.
It definitely does what it says on the tin, that one, doesn't it? So
You get what you asked for. Red, I want to thank you so much for coming on. This is a great conversation. We'll do it again in 2 weeks.
as always, a great pleasure, Jacob, and thank you very much for having me on the show.
Of course. That was Red Széll. He's the host of My Life in Books on AMI Audio. His show is also available as a podcast. It airs on AMI Audio as well at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's all the time we have for this edition of AMI Audiobook Review. AMI Audiobook Review airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern and repeats every 6 hours. But we also make ourselves easy to find. We're on all the big podcasting platforms and YouTube. You can email us at audiobookraview@ami.ca, and you can follow us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. It's not just for plugging the next episode, though. We're posting reels of our best moments on this show and exclusive content, too. For the people who are watching on YouTube, leave a like and subscribe. We want to hear your thoughts on the other and the importance of themes. I want to hear from you. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Thanks for listening to AMI Audiobook Review. We'll be back soon.